So this is Steve, and I'm here with Nick Tash. Nick, you're a Democrat running on the primary ballot for the at-large city council.
Yep.
We appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you.
Sure.
So, yes, like you said, I'm Nick Tash. I'm running for city council at large. I'm 19 years old, and I'm running on the Democratic primary ballot. So that's me.
Okay. Why did you decide to run?
Right, yeah. That's a question that I've been asked so many times and never had a really good answer for it. At least not until now, because I kind of realized, well, the reason I'm running is because I think up until this point, people of my generation, whatever that demographic you want to call it, the 18 to 35 demographic or whatever, or the so-called millennial generation, as we're called, we've been sort of left out of the discussion for most of the time. And I think that's been true of every young generation, is that they're usually left out of the discussion until they reach a certain age or whatever, where it's deemed that's the appropriate age for them to enter into a conversation about their community. But the problem I have with that is that decisions are being made about the community that we will someday have to inherit. And I think that we should be allowed to have a voice in that discussion already, so that when we do come to inherit this community, that it's a little bit more like we see it, a little bit more in the way that we would prefer it to be. And so I'm trying to hopefully represent that community. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm running, is really to try and give a voice to the people who have been sort of excluded mm-hmm. from the discussion. Mm-hmm. And I think because of that, you've seen an increase in alienation, particularly with my generation, where they're mostly apathetic to what goes on, particularly at a local level. Sometimes you can drum up enough interest in them to get them participating in federal elections. Case in point, the last election, 2008, or not the last presidential election, was, I think, one of the highest voting increases in, young people or whatever. You know what I mean? But on matters that affect the city and their neighborhoods, you just don't get a lot of interest, and that's something I'm trying to combat, at least, is to get them interested in that discussion.
No, streets and sewers and
right
aren't glamorous.
No, they're not. They're certainly not, and they're not particularly interesting. Right? Whatever that means sure. to most young people, but they are. It's all important, and particularly the fact that I can speak to this because I went to school with plenty of people who all they could talk about was leaving the city, was getting out of here, and I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out why that is. It is a number of things. There aren't the jobs that they want. There isn't the culture that they want here. There are a lot of things here that people of my generation want. I'm sorry, let me go back. There are a lot of things that aren't here that people of my generation want. You can't necessarily legislate those sort of things, but I think the idea is to try and work to keep these young energies, this young creative talent, and all these sorts of things here, so that it can begin to have that sort of atmosphere like they want.
Let's say that you're elected.
Sure.
And what would you hope to accomplish?
Okay. Well, like I said, hopefully foster that sort of discussion about public transportation. I try and get on the advisory board for CityLink, and sort of work from there, see what I can do from that position. I think Councilman Tom Smith and I share sort of the same concern over big box retail. He's concerned about filling these empty, big boxes up, which is a difficult thing to do. I'm more of the opinion that we should work to sort of limit the sort of influence these large retailers have on the local economy. So if I were elected to council, I try to work to getting a store size cap which is a piece of legislation that it's actually been implemented in a number of cities, and it's worked pretty effectively. Where what so it's best to work from an example. So an average football field is about 55,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
An average Walmart supercenter is about 150,000 square feet. It's a huge place, and you don't really realize it. But not only that, but it's a huge facility surrounded by acres of parking. It's a huge environmental impact, and an enormous use of land space that could be used for a number of other things. What this would do would set a maximum amount of retail space that you could have, say 50,000 square feet, just as an example. And so if these large retailers want to come, then they have to, their stores have to be within that, size range. Which is essentially saying, if you want to come here, then you sort of got to play by our rules. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I think it's well within the purview of the city council to be able to do those things. Because, they're in charge of zoning, they write the zoning laws and all that thing. So that's a big thing. And in concert with that, I think you would need to insist on a mixed building use policy where it's not just retail, but it could be retail on the bottom, apartments on top, community spaces, etc. The problem with these big box retailers is that they're built for one specific purpose, and that is commercial retail. There's not a lot else you could do with it, particularly the land or the building itself. And I think that's an issue because I think that we should have multi-use buildings, more multi-use buildings than we have, rather than just having these sort of cookie-cutter buildings that serve no other purpose than to sell product.
Sure.
So that's one thing you could do. One city has actually gone to the extreme of initiating a store limit cap. So you can only have so many fast food chains, fast food stores. I don't know how many chains, but the amount of stores that you have is limited.
Sure.
I know something like that wouldn't fly in the city probably, but I mean the idea is there. Requiring a large business like that. We're speaking mostly of retail businesses, not necessarily like a business like OmniSource or industrial business. We're talking about retail. A large retailer coming in would have to file an economic and environmental impact study, which would be submitted to the community, and the community could vote on whether or not they would like to accept it or decline it. I think there's nothing unreasonable about that, because a lot of times the community is sort of left out of the decision whether or not they actually want these large retailers to come in. And I think we need to work on that to get the community more involved in making the decisions about the kind of things they want to have in their community. So there's that. That's a large part of my platform, because I see local businesses, small businesses, as being keys to sustainability. And you don't see a lot of that anymore, given to the rise of these big box retailers. I think time was when you used to know your butcher. You actually used to know the person who, your baker, or your butcher, your baker, your candlestick maker. But that's not very true anymore. And not only that, but small businesses sort of foster that sense of community that I think we're sorely lacking in the community. But these sort of measures would serve to protect the local businesses and try and give them the premium, rather than trying to court these large retailers and trying to get their business, instead of focusing on the business that we have. I think that we should also sort of promote and champion those sort of alternative business models that we have in the community. For instance, the Three Rivers Co-op, which is a cooperative. It's run by the employees. They all have a share in running the company, and it's a very democratic way to run a business, and I think we should encourage that. And again, very key to sustainability. And then, so transportation is a big part of that. Protecting local businesses is a big part of that. And those are the sort of large chunks of what I think that I would hope to accomplish on city councils to work towards those goals. And like I said, Councilman Smith and I think have similar views, though I haven't gotten a chance to talk to him as much, because he's trying to work on filling these empty spaces, and that's another thing you could do is to, because a lot of times these big box retailers they put in their contracts the fact that a clause where these buildings are meant to remain empty for a long time. They don't actually allow other businesses to come in. And someone brought up an interesting point that if local businesses had the kind of money to put into big development projects, then the developers would certainly work with the local businesses rather than the large businesses. That's true, but it's sort of a what came first, the chicken or the egg type situation, where these large developments happen, and then it sort of sucked all the life out of local businesses, and then it sort of put them in a position where there's no way they could have come up with the kind of money to do these sorts of things that these big businesses did. So, I think that is an issue.